Hi Zoe, really good to see you. This is our second attempt at this call, so I'm sure we'll be just as sort of insightful, energetic, and entertaining as we were the first time around. Obviously, we met working together. You were heading up marketing at Equals Collective when we were there, and I was sort of overseeing other elements of the business. I think we sort of got on quite well on the marketing side of things because we had really different approaches. So I'm very much had been in a small business, self-taught, kind of winging it, but you had actual real life proper training and had gone into sort of a more corporate environment. So perhaps you can sort of explain a bit of your marketing background before we dive into things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're hit it nail on the head, really. I mean, I started my career in marketing, so I am a marketer by trade, and I've been doing marketing for 15 odd years, if not more, which is quite scary because that's kind of show my age a bit. But it's been really interesting because I didn't do the original go from university into the B2C side. I actually went straight into B2B, which back then was, oh, you work for B2B. I was like, yeah, I'm going to try that. And I actually loved it because I found it was quite interesting. And I worked in IT consultancies, and I've worked in civil engineering, local government and oil and gas. So some really varied sectors, which has brought a great breadth of experience. And then I got a bit fed up with working for the corporates and thought I would have a change in my career. And then that's when I started working as more of a marketing consultant, helping small businesses understand who their audiences are and what marketing they should be doing to kind of help them grow. And then moved to the previous company where you and I met. And more agency side. So that again was very different because working in the corporate world, I used to work with some fantastic agencies, and I really wanted to give it a whirl. It's like always a bit of I wonder what it's like working on the other side of the fence. So yes, and now my current role is working for a side project that I originally set up a couple of years ago, which is a disruptive technology company. So again, my career has changed a bit. It's not so much marketing, but it's kind of the whole range of startup world, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, is because of that diversity of experience, but also particularly around being involved in a startup in sort of maritime and oil, as is kind of what you're servicing essentially, that is tricky at the moment, I imagine. We'll come on to that in a little bit. But I was just sort of wondering, as a kind of born and bred marketer, what you've seen brands doing particularly well or particularly badly in this lockdown period, because I've seen some things that have, from my perspective, I just think are awful. And very often, actually, it's when brands are just doing nothing. They've just stopped communicating. So I wondered what you've kind of seen that particularly, I don't know, stood out to you, either good or bad.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've been watching the market quite closely. And on the B2B side, I haven't really seen anything that exciting. Apart from maybe LinkedIn, which has been more recent. And I've started to see LinkedIn advertising their platform on Instagram and Facebook. So, I mean, they've found a niche. They've got a bit of insight that actually people do work any time of the day. You could be doing business on your mobile phone and holding a baby under your arm, and they're tapping into that more consumer side, knowing that people that have normal lives also have businesses. So that's really good, actually, because that's a real shift for them. And then on the more consumer side, Joe Wicks, if you've got kids, then you'll know all about Joe Wicks and his personal brand. And he's just been phenomenal because he's just created this ripple effect across the whole country and actually globally, and got everyone back into fitness, and sort of had my children up in the morning doing their exercises. And he hasn't made any money from it, this particular piece, but it will have an effect on his other businesses, his cookbooks and his fitness business. So that's been really interesting. Brands that, unfortunately, I think are going to have a bit of a struggle, particularly if there's a second wave of brands, some of the shopping brands like Primark, mainly because they haven't had an e-commerce arm. And their profits have just taken the hugest hit because they haven't thought about that or had the foresight to build their e-commerce arm. Whether they do is going to be really interesting. and I think they really should, you know, because you've got lots of the other fashion brands out there using their e-commerce and still selling and pushing advertising and really actually trying to keep momentum going. Although it may.
Yeah, because I mean, you can't help thinking that footfall in kind of retail is going to be way down for a really long time. So any brand that isn't trying to engage with consumers in kind of different ways, in ways that they want to shop, is going to really suffer, aren't they?
It really is.
And what's it been like for you, you know, in Bulugo, you know, in a startup, you got some funding. I know not sort of huge piles of money, but you got enough money that you can kind of do the things you want to do. What have you found people have responded to, or, you know, how's it going?
It's been, again, I mean, the oil and gas market isn't great at the moment. There's a lot of disruption. You know, the economy has taken a bit of a nosedive, which has an impact on needing to ship goods around the world, because 90% of the goods that we receive, our clothes, our medicine, everything is on a vessel around the seas. And also the industry's been impacted by coronavirus. On the seafarers actually on board, so they've had massive travel restrictions placed on them. So there's thousands of men and women just stuck on these vessels 100 days plus with no end in sight. So wow. It's just been a bit of a mess, to be honest. But from my point of view, from marketing, I've still kept going. It's been more on the sales side. So, you know, my background, I have had experience in the maritime sector before, and so has the founding team. So we've really just got to grips with all our relationships and used the social media platforms to reconnect with old colleagues and acquaintances from the industry. So it's been much more personal, sort of a bit more traditional, if you like. Some of the marketing activity that I would have done, I actually put a pause on. So we did originally some LinkedIn testing. So I've got that now. I've got that data, and I can use that as we go forward. But interestingly, we had a really interesting piece of PR to put out, which was quite a cool story. And we paused it because at the time when I was ready to go, yeah, let's set that out, I mean, it just wouldn't have penetrated anyone. It was just all COVID, like, you know. So we have been doing marketing, but we've just been watching the market, and then we'll be ready to pounce, you know, probably another month or so, as it changes.
Because I remember when we've talked about Bulugo a bit in the past, when you were just getting up and running it, I hadn't realised that the maritime industry is pretty traditional. It's quite old school in its ways of operating. Have you found people are a bit more open-minded to a bit of innovation now? Are they thinking, actually, this is a real shake-up and we need to find new ways of working? Has that conversation been any easier?
Absolutely, 100%. It's really interesting. A lot of the maritime press are reporting about digitalization and innovation. And generally, a lot of the new industry news is about autonomous vessels, you know, how we use drones to do drops and pickups from ships when we're not using people, perhaps. Remote surveys, again, reducing the number of people on board vessels. E-commerce platforms, I've seen a rise in that as well, which is what Bulugo is. And it's really interesting. I did a LinkedIn poll around the disruption of COVID-19 and if it was going to enhance digitalization. 84% said yes.
Wow.
I mean, that's big. That's, you know, showing that people are ready for this disruption and generally ways of working. You know, we are all so used to using the Zooms and the Google Hangouts of this world now that it's going to be norm. Yeah. So ways of working, definitely. General industry, loads of stuff, loads and loads of news. And then from a marketing point of view, as you say, it's very traditional industry. So exhibitions are pretty much any calendar across the industry, because that is the main place that you would go and showcase your brand, meet new people, engage them on your stands, and just generally network and do business. So they've all been cancelled or postponed until the end of the year next year. And we were going to attend quite a few exhibitions for that reason of the networking, which we're not doing now, for the safety of our team, and also because I don't believe that the right people will be there. because the oil majors or the big boys in the industry have all got travel bans. So they're unlikely to be letting their teams travel around the world freely so much now. But the interesting shift is there's been a lot more online. So a lot more webinars, and generally just everything's moving online, which I think will actually continue.
And do you think you're able to get that level of engagement with people that have been, it sounds like, really used to kind of face-to-face, in that kind of exhibition type environment?
Yeah.
Can you get people to, I suppose for you want people to commit and say, yeah, we want to see how this works and we're interested in signing up? Can you tip them over?
I think it's a really interesting point, because you can't see the whites of their eyes. You're not there, having that banter that you might normally, and that build that relationship. But I think people's way of working and their opinions are going to start changing. And if you can't go out for your own safety, or the industry is so turbulent, people are getting so much more comfortable with doing business at home, or at least exploring new ideas. And so I definitely think that it will start to move. Other industries are going to have to do it, and they will do it. So maritime will be catching up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of have to be hopeful that some of the things that marketers would have loved to have done years ago, but they just couldn't get sort of buy-in of businesses, or clients wouldn't engage in that way, you can now do. There's now an opportunity to try things that are actually a bit more imaginative, a bit more creative. I don't know. Whilst there's a lot of, real carnage going on in the marketplace, I get quite excited about the potential that there is to work in different ways. I don't know whether you kind of feel the same about it.
Absolutely. I am quite excited. I've been on this app. There's a new maritime app that's launched, and it's a community-based app. And they are a media company, basically, and they're using that to bring their industry onto their app. And they're also creating events. And they just announced today that they're going to be hosting an exhibition later on in the year. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. So I was straight on there, making my comment around the thing you're going to need to do is somehow bring the networking online.
Yeah.
So there's one thing that you should be thinking about to make that a successful event. It's how do you do that? So I watched this space eagerly.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, because I took part in a kind of online sort of ski industry a bit because of my history, but mountains in general, and their positioning and their marketing. And there's some really great sort of seminars that they delivered online, and those had pretty good viewing figures. Then people could go and watch them later. But they sort of built on their platform so you could connect with other people and have one-to-ones. And my gut feel is it didn't really happen. Either that or nobody was inviting me for one. But I don't think it really happened from feedback I've had from other people. So I think, if somebody cracks that chance conversation over a coffee element of bringing people under one roof that you've had in the past, that would be quite cool. That'd be quite good. But how they'll do it, I don't know.
I know. Well, I'll let you know once I've been to this exhibition.
No, it sounds good. And more generally, in thinking with your more general person who's interested in marketing hat on, are there kind of trends that you think we'll see over the next, maybe 6 months is even too short, but the next sort of 12, 18 months?
Yeah, so I think generally sort of integrated marketing mix. So this is a bit of an old-fashioned term that I learned at university, but I do believe that because things are changing so rapidly, you need to consider different marketing channels. This might be a bit of a full loop on where we went, in previous years with previous business, but digital is super important, and that's going to flourish. But small businesses mustn't forget other channels. So you mustn't forget your PR, you mustn't forget your new online events. It's not just about Google ads and Facebook advertising. You should test it, learn from it, and then figure out what works, because we're constantly changing. I mean, I know when I'm online, my user habits are constantly changing. I'm led off in all kinds of directions by influencers that I read. I might see something you post, Chris, and then I'm like, oh, that looks really interesting, and then
dive off. And
yeah, so it's really diverse. So you think about all the different channels where your customers are. I think still going to be really important, and just thinking outside the box on that, and trying to. It's difficult to get insight. People talk about custom insight, and unless you've got your customers really accessible and you can easily go and survey, hundreds of people, it is very much trial and error. So that's like the first thing. The second thing is I've just seen that TikTok have announced their business platform.
Right.
So that's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves. I don't think it's ever going to be relevant for B2B market, but if you're B2C, I think that's a really interesting opportunity for brands to get in front of the younger generations. Yeah. If you haven't seen TikTok, it's probably, if you're a bit over 30, I'd be like, I don't know if it's really right for you. I've definitely had a look and thought, I'm probably too old for this platform. And then the other thing is growing communities. So like this app that I've just discovered, community apps, bringing people together, like-minded people together, and seeing how that grows.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think all of those I can kind of see in my own experiences. The mix thing is really interesting because on a tiny scale, Bex, my wife, has recently launched a new business which is delivering kind of plants and gifts very locally. Yeah. So Facebook is great for that because you can really tightly target people. But she's also gone out with flyers, on an evening walk, and every single street she's posted things through letterboxes. Everyone has had an order. So that's a kind of tiny example, but you can't forget those kind of physical contacts with people. Yeah, people quite like that. And then the community side of things, I think, is fascinating. When I think back to my experience in travel in the past, we always wanted to make people feel like they were almost like joining a club, that they'd found something and that they were one of a kind of an elite group of people. And I think brands that create that sort of spirit where people identify with it and they feel part of a club, that's great, the loyalty you get there. So no, I think I like those points, definitely. So get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And for your wife, get her to have a look at Nextdoor. So that's another community group that she'll really benefit from. And if you are creating those groups like we used to have at Castrol, the Ambassador Club, well, they still have it, I'm sure. And that's exactly the same. You've got your really good high performers, and they have a very lovely group and they get benefits from being in that group. And that's when they become brand advocates, and you're delighting your customers, and that's when they naturally recommend you, and then it's the full circle again of the sort of the loyalty ladder.
Well, there's lots of interesting things for us to kind of watch over the next few months, aren't there? And see where it goes. But it's been really good to get your take on it, because I look at these things, like most of us, we're sitting looking at the kitchen table in isolation at the moment. So it's quite nice to chat to other people about the ideas. And it'd be great to see what sort of, when people watch this, what other thoughts they have as well. And we can kind of regroup in a few months when we see how markets are shaping up.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for talking. Bye.